Another episode of the Artisans of Steel podcast. I am here today talking with a maker whose work I have admired for a very long time. I really respect the man. I've been fortunate to meet him a few times, but this is going to be a great opportunity to have an actual deeper conversation with him, to get to know his background a little bit better. And I would say the one thing that really helps his work stand apart is the way he uses blacksmithing techniques to accent his work, and he's doing it in such a high level that it looks. I mean, it's very intentional, and it's a really great look and an aesthetic that very few makers, I feel like, can properly achieve. But before we get into this conversation with our friend Lin Rhea, we're going to get through our sponsors real quick. We're just going to talk about the people here, the super sponsors of the Patreon. If you are wanting to be be a sponsor of the Patreon, or be part of these live conversations to help direct how these conversations go, and to have the opportunity to talk to these makers firsthand, then if you go to my Patreon and you sign them up at the illuminated individual level, I shouldn't have made that such a tongue twister, but I did. Anyways, if you sign up at the illuminated individual level, then you can be part of these live streams and be part of the conversations that we're having here on the podcast. So our super sponsors this month are, first off, Mr. Michael Poor. He's Red Dragon Forge. He's been here since the beginning. He's a great guy. He's doing really great work. He's a talented cook. He's a good follow on Instagram, and I'm excited to be working. I didn't get to see him this last month. I was supposed to see him. Unfortunately, he wasn't feeling well and wasn't able to make the class, the Damascus class. But I'm going to be doing some work with him. He's going to be putting out some cool patterns, I think, pretty soon. I mean, he's already does cool work, but is a pattern that he's been dreaming about, and I feel fortunate to be able to work with him and help him with that. So go check out Michael Poor on Instagram at Red Dragon Forge. Next up, we have Russell Tinsley of Ouzelfinch Beers. Ouzelfinch Beers is based out of Virginia, and you can find them on Instagram at Ouzelfinch Beers. They have really tasty, delicious beverages that are very outside the box. You got to go check them out. You can find them on Instagram, see all the different stuff that they're coming out with nonstop. You can buy their beers at their brewery, or go to your local beer market, and if they don't already carry it at the local beer market, talk to the buyer about getting some in. The beers are really good. The labels are really great. I would be astonished if they didn't get a few flats in, and or multiple flats, and they didn't have, and they were able to hold on to any of them, because they are really tasty and out of the box, and I really love them. So go check them out. Check him out again at Ouzelfinch Beers. And then his maker page is Can't Make Knives. And he's going to be, I think he's already taken the class, or it's coming up soon. But he's going to be up at the New England School of Metalwork taking another class. And every time he does, he's leveling up his game and doing really great work. So go give him a follow at Can't Make Knives, as well as at Ouzelfinch. That's OOZLE Finch Beers. Okay, next up is Mr. Dan Hubbs. He is 6'6", that's the numbers, 6'6" Mountain Knives on Instagram and Facebook. I was very fortunate to work with and meet Dan at my Damascus class that I taught at the end of September. And he's a great guy, and very creative and talented. I'm excited. He's already been, we have kind of like a group from that class where we continue to message and chat with each other. And he's already putting some of that work, some of that information to work in his Damascus making, and he's coming up with some fun patterns, and I'm excited for him to be putting those out, because I think they're gonna catch people off guard, and I think that's a good thing. That's the fun part, is trying to make people think and confuse them a little bit. And so he's going to be doing that with some of his work he's coming up with soon. But otherwise, he makes his own kumai. He's doing great EDCs. Go check him out on Instagram and Facebook at 6'6" Mountain Knives. All right, next up is Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply. You can find him on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply. Again, another maker I got to spend time with and hang out with. Not at my Damascus class. That was last year. He did that class. I got to see him again at the Maker Camp in East Durham, New York, in upstate New York. And it's always great to see him. He's such a good dude. And he's such a good dude that he knows my kid loves Legos, and he knows my kid was going to be at Maker Camp. And he was gracious enough to bring a fun little kit of Legos that my kid absolutely loved. He couldn't actually, my kid wanted to leave the Maker Camp so he could go and build the Legos. So we saved it. I think we saved, he did do it actually in one of the evenings at Maker Camp. When the camp was done and everything for him, he got some Lego time. But anyways, Lawrence is a great guy. He's got all the supplies you need for making knives. He's in Atlantic Canada, up in I believe it's Nova Scotia. And so get a hold of him for whether it's grinders, whether it's belts, any kind of handle materials, steels, tools, like anvils and hammers and all that other kind of stuff. You can find that with Lawrence. And if he doesn't already have it, he can get it for you. And so go check him out at Maritime Knife Supply, maritimenifesupply.com. Lawrence is a great guy. Go give him your support, please. All right. Next up, we have Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing and of Anchorage Forge. He's on Instagram as both of those handles. Brewing is his day job. Although I think knife making might become part of his new day job. But anyways, he is one of the most talented brewers whose drinks are some of the best I've ever had in my life. I'm not necessarily a beer aficionado, but I drink a lot of different varieties of beers, and this is his beers are some of the best I've ever had, and it's certified by winning multiple awards from around the world. So go check them out. If they don't have it at your beer market, they probably do, but they might not. So if they don't, go talk to the buyer again. Talk to the beer market buyer. Tell them to get Anchorage Brewing in, and because you're not going to regret it. And then also on his Anchorage Forge page on his Instagram, he's doing awesome work. I've had the fortune of working with him several times now. And we've become friends over these, I guess it's been about a year now, a little over a year, and that we've been working together off and on. And he was actually in my class at the end of September, and he is already doing some really cool, crazy stuff with Damascus. And so he's fun to watch because in a year and a half, he's really blown the doors off and doing some really awesome work. So go check him out again at Anchorage Brewing and at Anchorage Forge on Instagram. All right, next up we have Eric Kidwell. He is at District 202, another great guy. He's working on getting his shop not put back together. He's building a new shop. And so he's been part of the knife community for a long time. He's a creative guy. He's I think he's a mechanical engineer by trade. And so he's wanting to get back or get into knife making. He's been around it for so long, especially through the Travis Wirtz Hammer-In, where he is kind of the on the point man with the camera. They're so smart at that Hammer-In. They run around with, or Eric is running around with the camera, so you can, when somebody's doing a grinding demo, especially, you can, it's broadcasted to a large flat screen TV, if not maybe a couple, I can't remember now, so that you don't have to necessarily be standing like over that maker's shoulder and looking down at what they're doing. He's doing that for you so that more eyes can see it at once. He's a great dude, and he's doing good work. And so go give him a follow on Instagram at District 202 LLC. Finally, we have Mr. Josh A. Weston. That's Josh A. Weston on Instagram. He's also part of the Dragon Forge experience, and they just finished up building what do you want to call it? A squadron? Would you call it a squadron of dragons? I wonder if Josh would call it a squadron, or maybe they call it like a rookery of dragons, kind of like ravens, but dragons. Anyways, they fabricate these these forges. They build these dragons around the forge. So when you go to one of these Renaissance festivals where they have this the dragon set up, you are forging out of the flames of the dragon's mouth. And it looks like a lot of people are having a lot of fun, kind of having their first forging experience through these dragons, and it's very magical, I feel like, and very cool. And I love these dragons. They're not the same dragon. I think there's 5 new, completely separate, completely different dragons. I don't even know how many hours they have into doing these dragons. Actually, it would be cool to get Josh maybe onto into the Artisans of Steel or the Q&A for the Patreon and talk to him about some of what he's doing with these dragons, because it's introducing forging to people in a very playful way, and but it's also very artful and very cool, and I think a lot of people are getting a lot of joy of it. So go check out Josh A. Weston on Instagram, as well as the Dragon Forge EXP. That's the Dragon Forge experience on Instagram. Okay. Whew. Thank you for hanging in. Today, as I started to say in our little intro, Lin Rhea is my guest. He is a maker who, gosh, I think it was either the first or the second Artisans of Steel calendar that I made. I asked him to be part of the calendar. And I've really admired his work for a very long time. The way he forges blades and the way he's using blacksmithing techniques to create his work is just really admirable, really more than anything. I see work like his and it pushes me to want to be a better forger. And it also doesn't make me sad, but I'm just like, I see his stuff and I'm like, wow, I definitely could be doing a lot more. So without further ado, I'm just going to pull in here. He's joining us from Arkansas, and before the heat hits. And I appreciate you, Lin, for coming in and joining us today in this conversation.
I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much.
Marco.
Absolutely. Like I said, I've really admired your work for a long time. We talked a little bit about this before the podcast, but I think what's cool, not only are you using blacksmithing techniques for your work, for your knife making, you create some of the best brute forge knives I've seen. You're using some of those blacksmithing techniques and pushing it into you're mixing actually a lot of really ancient, or not, I guess you'd call them ancient or old techniques, I guess, of hot fitting and hot forging, like guards into the bottom of blades, into the recrossable blades, and for those fit ups, especially on some of your brute to forge pieces. So it mixes kind of these traditional techniques with it in a new style and in a new way that you've really used to kind of help kind of like carve out your own little niche, your own style. And I don't think it was necessarily just to be different. It is you're using your understanding of how the material moves to it's just an expression of your creativity, and it comes through your knife work. And it's not just the blacksmithing. It's also some of your spacers that you do. I don't see really any other people doing that look like twisted cord. And so it's just all kinds of stuff. And I really appreciate you joining us today, and I appreciate the work that you do and that you put out there. And you also do an incredible job sharing a ton. You teach as well as post a lot of your process and stuff on your Instagram or on your social medias.
Thank you, Marco. I appreciate you saying so. I do believe in sharing. One of the reasons that I do is because um, if someone has the talent to do good work, why should I stand in their way? And what I mean by that is I can share the ideas that I have and the little techniques and the little things I've discovered,
Right.
and let someone else expound on it and make it their own or do better. So I think if we can't, if we keep everything secret, then you know um, it's not going to be appreciated as much.
Sure. Well, and I think something part of the reason I share especially I used to do my pattern welded Wednesdays where I would do the walkthroughs of my different mosaic patterns, and a lot of them were things, some of them are traditional, like W's explosions and stuff like that. But I was also sharing new techniques that I was using to make some of my patterns, and some of my unusual patterns and my forging techniques and stuff like that. And I got pushback from people, but I think part of the reason, the benefit of sharing is to see that feedback loop. So I do a thing and then I send it out into the world, and then somebody else does something with it. And it's like, and then I see it and I'm like, wow, that's cool. And that makes me think of something else. And then I bring it back and it comes full circle. And it's a cyclical thing. It's just more of a symbiotic thing rather than a parasitic. I think a lot of people are afraid it's going to be very parasitic. I'm going to put something out there, everybody's going to take it and use it, and that's it. And that might be the case for some people if they struggle with creativity and coming up with new stuff. But you seem like a guy who's kind of a bottomless well, I guess, of creativity and imagination, that you just keep coming up with new things, and I love them.
Thanks. I believe you hit on something when you said it's a cyclical thing. It's when I see people imitate my work,
Mm,
they may be in another country, they may be in another part of the world.
yeah,
I see that under their conditions, the equipment they have or lack of, they make it their own, and they have their own taste, their own flair. It's not going to be exactly like mine.
no,
It's just not, because my setting and what I choose to use as far as my equipment, whether I use a grinder or I forge something in, uh, or a mix of all that,
right,
is going to affect the outcome, and that's what theirs is going to be. That they don't have the same equipment that I do, but they still are taking the idea, and they're running with it, and they're showing their creativity, and I learn from that. So
yeah,
it's, to me, it's not a secret.
yeah. And I'd be curious what oh, geez, I just had something and my brain just died, or like brain fart. In regards to sharing, and oh, so like you were saying, you put out and you share some of your processes and stuff. You're not going into it in like great detailed instructional videos, but you're showing kind of a step by step kind of thing, a progression, a photographic progression of what you're working on. And a, a lot of people, again, when I was doing my thing, people would be like, "Oh, you're giving away your secrets. This could be your thing. You should." I've been told many times that I should copy, or no, what is it, copyright or patent
Yeah,
some of my pattern welding designs and stuff like that.
yeah.
I'm just like, but it's hard enough. It's like it's hard already. So if somebody else can do it or possibly expound on it, good on them, because they still have to do the work. I can show a step-by-step progression like you do, but I'm not holding their hand the whole time. They
That's the
still
way I
have to
look at it
figure it
too.
out and work it out.
I look at it exactly the same way. They're doing the work, and
Yeah,
I just get them started and give them an idea, and who knows where it's going to go, or what I'm going to learn from it. So if
right.
they're, like I said, if they're talented enough to do it, then I'm all for it. I'm going to help them.
Yeah. Well, can we take a second and back up? And I want to understand, where did you grow up? What was childhood like? Um, and early adult, and I guess, yeah, early adulthood, and how did you eventually end up getting to knife making? um and where you're at with the craft as it is. You're constantly innovating, and it's awesome to see somebody come. I mean, again, I don't know where you came from, but to constantly be coming up with creative new ideas and techniques and ways of assembling things, that is very, I think it's cool because it pushes other people to think more about how they potentially could build stuff rather than the constant conventional process. And convention's great, but I think for a lot of creative people, they want to do something different. They just have this drive to do something different. But where did it start? What were you like as a kid? Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised here in Central Arkansas, and by and large the country, out in the rural areas, and so I I still live that way. So
Mhm.
It's kind of quiet now. You may hear a rooster crow, but it's pretty quiet out here, and that's
Sure.
where I'm working. Is where I live. My my parents were working people. My mother was a stay at home mom. That's what they're called today.
Mm.
Then it was housewife and mother.
Sure. Yeah.
And my dad he worked for a local company that for years and years, and finally retired. And uh, so we weren't well off, but
Okay.
we to say we were poor and didn't know it is a more accurate way.
Okay.
We did fine. We had everything we needed, and I
Yeah.
appreciate my parents and what they did in my upbringing more and more the older I get.
Sure.
Um, they instill values in us, but my dad always took us hunting and fishing. Uh, that was a big part of our life. So knives were absolutely necessary. We didn't have much. I mean, we just got by with what anybody else would that's not familiar with custom work.
Hmm.
Um, but at some point after marriage and children were real young, I started getting interested in uh, what makes a knife work. Uh, Interested in what the heat treat would be like. Everything from folders to fixed blades, um, and raised my kids. I didn't have much chance to do much at that time, but
Okay.
my kids got grown and out of the house. Then my wife suggested that I take a course
Mm.
at the American Bladesmith School. So I started there in 2002. I had no idea, no plans to become a career knife maker. I
Wow.
just wanted to be a hobby, and just get to know how to make a knife and what goes into a good knife. If I could just make myself one to hunt with, and uh, you know, upgrade from time to time just by me making my own.
Hmm.
Well, it just kind of snowballed, uh, and here we are. But
I'm gonna interrupt real quick. I
yeah,
feel like 2002 wasn't. I mean, I guess it was 21 years ago, but in across your lifespan, that wasn't that long ago. I feel like
no,
even
no,
I think I graduated high school in 2002, and I still feel like that wasn't really that long ago. um, and so you kind of came to knife making then kind of a bit later in life.
yeah.
What
But
what were you doing before you got into knife making?
I think what I was doing had a great influence on my understanding of geometry and um, I don't know. Some people call it spatial awareness and
Sure.
understanding of things like that. I was a builder.
Okay.
I was a builder. I not only did heavy construction when
Hmm.
I was much younger, but I've always been a home builder. And by if to be specific, my forte was uh, complicated roof systems.
Okay.
So we're talking angles and measurements and calculations and um, figuring hips and valleys and other complicated parts of the roof.
Sure.
And that was my forte, and I still enjoy that knowledge. And but I picked it up by my own
Oh
uh,
wow.
stubbornness. I checked out books from the library. I borrowed books, and I did worksheets and stuff. I mean, I'm talking about just on my own
Yeah.
um, to learn these mathematical equations. And
Oh wow.
so I don't know. I guess I was just interested in make how things work.
Right.
And so I think that had a lot to do with me just being interested in what technically makes a knife. It's a static object. I mean, once
Right.
it's completed, it's static. It's just sitting there. It's waiting on someone to interact with it with their hand holding it. Um, but what makes it usable and functional and durable. So those are the things I was really going for.
Sure. When I was younger, I a buddy of mine's father was a subcontractor, and he had a few guys that worked for him that were kind of like just run around and helped. We did some of the work. Like I've framed out buildings, and I've done siding, like exterior siding and some roofing, but that was not with that company. But anyways, and it's cool to hear you talk, because I talk about the roofing, because people think a roof is a roof, but if you look at it, and some of the, especially historical houses that we have around here, we have houses that were built in 1880s, 1830s. Some of them are really old for us, and they have all these different dormers and different peaks and all this different stuff going on. And I see that, and I'm just like, I don't even understand how you start to figure out all the, like, the roofing, how the roofing comes together and everything. Again, my experience is very limited to where I demoed it was a cedar roof off skip sheeting, and then we resheeted the whole, on top of the skip sheeting we put down, uh I think it was like half-inch sheeting, and or maybe 3/8, I can't remember. Anyways, put that up, and then roof the whole thing. And it's that, having that experience, as basic as that is when it comes to roofing, I think it was really valuable, especially when it comes to forging. Oddly enough, I people ask me, how do I get better at forging? And like, get a job roofing. And if, I mean, I don't know if they're using nails anymore, but if you have to sit there and slam nails all day long, you're gonna get pretty accurate at how you strike. It's just 2 hits: tap it, slam it, tap it, sink it, tap it, sink it, tap it, sink it, and you get pretty good pretty quick.
Yeah. So I've used a hammer a lot in my
Right.
career, all the way back. So uh, I do believe that played a big part, not just muscle memory, but
Sure.
knowing instinctively how hard to strike
Sure.
to accomplish what you want to with that blow. And there's just a lot of people that first walk up to uh, the forge and the anvil with a hot piece of, even a small piece of steel. They have no idea how hard to hit it,
Sure.
and you can see, and they choke up on the hammer. They peck at it, and they're scared of it. Uh, so those kind of things I had sort of mastered before I even started
Yeah.
forging. So that was
Well,
a
I can see with that building experience, then, background, how that really does help you with kind of planning out your builds in the organization, or kind of the progression or the steps you need to take
mm-hmm.
to get to where you want. Um, especially when it comes to your complicated forgings that you're doing, how to kind of think that out ahead of time, so that you're not necessarily, I mean, maybe sometimes on the fly you're making things up and coming up with stuff, but I would guess that you have a bit of a plan, and a progression that you're going to follow, and maybe that gets tuned and adjusted down the road, but you probably almost always have a plan that you're following a little bit, so that you're economizing your time, you're economizing your resources, your heat, especially since you do so much work out of a coal forge or a coke forge. Um, so I've, again, it's something I've admired about your work for a long time. So so you got into forging. What was so you took a class? Was that at the Texarkana school?
Well, at the time it was in historic Washington State Park
Oh, okay.
at the Bill Moran School of Bladesmithing. It was
Okay.
located there at the time, and yeah, we used a gas forge. We also used coal at that time. Uh, the Bill Moran School no longer uses coal,
Okay.
uh, but it's it's a it's a form of heating my steel and metal that I just find to be very precise and useful, and I like it.
I would love, just to come and observe you using. I mean, I've seen people use a coke forge or coal forge. Sorry, do you call it a coal or a coke forge? I guess it depends on the fuel source.
Well, I use coal, but
Okay.
I coke it up
Okay.
myself, so
All right.
it's both.
Okay. We'll just call it coal forge just for
Sure, it's fine.
simplicity's sake, or lack trying to prevent confusion because I probably already am starting to confuse people. um, yeah, so I think it's really cool. So I again, I selfishly like part of me having you on here is one because I admire your work, but two, there's so much I want to understand about you and your approach because again, it's been something I've admired for several years now, and and you do teach classes, and I would love someday to come work with you and forge beside you, especially out of a coal forge, to see how you're utilizing that heat, how you're isolating different. I think what's really great, and and what I understand from talking to other forgers that use a coal forge, is that you can isolate heat quite a bit better than putting your piece of steel into a forge and heating up the entire blade or a large section of blade. You can isolate it down to maybe just a couple inches. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And there's a learning curve that comes along with using coal.
sure.
So I believe that's the part that is so intimidating to some people. Just to
Hmm.
um, having to be able to master that. It's sort of like the difference between cooking on a modern cooktop
Hmm.
and an old wood cook stove.
Oh, right.
You had to be in control of the air, the draft, and the fuel, and any other things that affected the outcome of the meal. You had to you played a direct part on in that. So whereas it's turn a knob or push a button on the modern cooktop or
Hmm.
oven and set the temperature, even a timer. Well, none
Right.
of that applies. You are the timer.
You are the thermometer.
You're all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How much air, and that's another reason why I use a either a bellows or a hand crank blower
Mm,
over an electric fan. Now, I've I've used and taught at schools where the electric blower and I it takes me a minute and to get used to that and have to constantly switch it off so I won't if I'm talking or
oh, sure.
instructing I don't burn up a piece of steel or something and I'm constantly reaching up for the bellows and it's not there, you know.
I gotcha.
So I'll have to explain what that motion is. You know, it's a habit.
I gotcha.
Or I'm reaching for the blower over to on my left side. So um, it's something you get used to, and it's just like anything else. You get better at it once you're used to using your tools.
Would you liken it to driving a manual versus driving an automatic?
Sure, that's another way to look at it too.
I'll-
It's entirely on you. It's it's not. You can't complain about the transmission because you're driving it.
You're the one in charge. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's something I have. I've just it's so foreign to me, but it's something I do want to learn and better understand because for me, this knife making. I mean, it's a business. It's my job, but it's definitely my passionate pursuit. I guess it's kind of my practice in a way where I want to learn as much as I can about the various techniques, not only for forging blades but for making them, and this is one I feel like is a glaring void in my uh, my abilities and skills. Is understanding how to use a coal forge. I always said if I ever had to go back and forge a fire, and we did coal forging, I'd be out. I'd almost probably just turn around and walk away. I mean, I would try, but I'd probably be ruining steel left and right. But I do like the idea of even having the automatic blower or the motorized blower versus the hand crank blower or the bellows. Again, to just kind of have um, that analog kind of interaction, that interface by having those levels of control, and it does. I think bring you into more of a flow state, which is often referred to as just like where you're just so present in what you're doing, nothing else in the world is happening.
That's that's the way I would look at it too. And the more that the maker has to be involved in the process, the more that he can involve himself
Mm-hmm.
in the process and remove other things that are partially in control or doing some of the work for the maker.
Yeah.
The more you can involve yourself, the better you feel about it, and actually the more of you can put into it. And there's no excuses. You cannot make excuses
Sure.
when you're working in those conditions. There's
Right.
it's on you. You're part of the process. The tools are not going to carry you. The equipment's not going to carry you. Uh, so I think it's a philosophy as much as anything
Mm.
else.
Yeah. I like that. So when you first got started, what style knives were you making? And were you did you start working out of a coal forge right away? Oh, I guess yeah. You said that first class at the Bill Moran school, they had the coal forges, and there's something about them that just clicked with you that you wanted to keep doing. So how long after that first class did you start just loading up on tools? Maybe you already had some of those tools, but and start really kind of bumping up your knife making and kind of phasing out of your building career.
Um, my first knives were really rough. They were so basic, so utterly simple that, and I still have one or two here and there that I kept.
Yeah.
Um, but I just wanted to. One of the reasons I went to school, not just to learn, but was to see what equipment I was going to need.
Mm,
So I didn't have much, and
sure.
over time I would look ahead and think, well, I'm going to need that piece of equipment, so I'd buy it and never use it.
Oh,
It wasn't even, it was something I thought I could adapt. Well, I got out of
sure.
that phase pretty quick.
Yeah.
I learned after you spend a few $100 uh, buying equipment that you either never use or just it's not appropriate or
I guess so.
it's too poorly made. It's just not a good example of what the tool was.
I got you.
Um,
Yeah.
that you at some point you realize, hey, I got to spend the money. I've got to buy good equipment. And I need what knife makers would use in this instance.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if it's. I mean, part of my limitation has always been financials, and so I have a very
Of
simple
course.
setup, and when I have friends come see the shop, I feel like they're kind of looking around the shop and they're wondering where all
Yeah.
the rest of the stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
Is all the other tools in a different part of the building? I'm like, no, this is it. I don't have, unfortunately. I mean, I would love to have, a few. I think there's a few other pieces of equipment that I think would be fun, especially to have, especially if I want to, build a folding knife from time to time, or do, I don't know, doing more machining kind of work. A bridge, like a bridge bore end mill of some sort, would be nice to
Mm-hmm.
have. Um, when it comes to my Damascus production, like having a rolling mill would be great. I've been playing with the idea of making Damascus commercially, and one of the slowest parts of it is just getting the material drawn out, and a rolling mill would expedite that process pretty darn quickly. But other than that, I actually don't really need my shop to be more complicated than it is. Yeah.
No, I think if you build a 2,000 square foot shop, you're going to fill it up. If you build a 500 square foot shop, you're going to fill it up
Hmm.
with equipment and tools. So while I've added on my shop a time or two, it's gone about as far as it can go,
Hmm.
and it's full. And so now it's time to upgrade some things. So in other words, if I have one piece of equipment and it really needs upgrading, then I'll just swap it out. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not taking up any more room. I'm just
I got
upgrading
you.
the equipment. So that's at the stage where I am at now.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much as probably a lot of people think to work with. Uh, to start with, since I'm using coal a lot, I don't need as much in the way of gas forges, and I have good gas forges. I have a ribbon burner and several small, just for carbon steel um, blades, some small forges,
Hmm.
gas forges, and I just picked up another one. Uh, I I never owned a Venturi style um, forge. Now I got one, but I hadn't fired it up yet.
Okay.
I just kind of want to try it and see.
Sure.
Everything I got is fan forced,
Oh, sure.
um, but no, I again, I don't think it's the philosophy that I have of being a minimalist or being a bigger part of the process that's kept me from um, getting equipment. I think it's mostly the limited space I have.
Sure.
Uh, However, that limited space has driven me to be more part of the process,
Right. Yeah.
and it's also opened up a new world of sort of forced me to face that thinking, that philosophy that I was talking about, being a somewhat of a minimalist. And I don't always do that. Sometimes I use every piece of equipment in the shop on a particular knife.
Sure.
But then there's those knives, the style of knife that I make sometimes that has, I actually set myself a limit
Okay.
on what I do. It's all going to be done either by hand or just limited material.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a benefit to working within constraints, especially when it comes to limitation of tooling, because even though I know how a lot of tools work, I know how to run an end mill, and I know how to use a rolling mill, and I know how to use a lot of different machines. But because I have a very simple setup, um, it actually I think it affords me the ability to work very well in most anybody else's shop because I'm not heavily reliant on specialized tools. I have a very simple setup so that when I do go to somebody else's shop, as long as they have a similar, at least those basics,
Mm-hmm.
foundational tools, I can work in their shop, no problem. And if they have the extra tools, then that's just a bonus, really, more than anything, to help ease some of the processes. But for the most part, I've because of my simple setup, I think it actually benefits me to have the flexibility to be able to go and work in other people's shops quite easily.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. One of the reasons I like to go to the New England School up in Auburn, Maine,
Hmm.
um, is because they teach the historic
Right.
techniques using historic tools. Now, they do have electric blowers on their forges,
Hmm.
but they use really good quality coal. They have good ventilation um, because you take if there's 8 coal forges within one large room, you can understand why ventilation is going to be so very critical.
Yeah.
Uh, with those who are unfamiliar with it, um, just starting up the fires in the morning, you got 8 of them starting fresh. It's going to create a lot of
A
smoke.
lot of smoke.
So the fans are absolutely necessary. Their ducting system, uh, the way they're set up, where it would draft pretty well on its own, but they just make sure by having a fan in the system to pull it out.
Sure.
So anyway, I favor that because their techniques and their um, their equipment are so close to what I use anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some of my projects that I make, and if I'm asked to teach that project, um, I require a cold forge. It requires a cold
Oh,
forge
right.
because if you try to use a gas forge on some of my projects, it just won't go well. It won't go well at all.
Sure.
It's
Does
just
that
not.
have to get? Does that get back into isolated heats?
Yes, it does. It absolutely isolated heats and and control. So if say you got a like on one of my X-ray knives, you may have a on one part of the and you're midway in the process.
I have a couple
One,
pictures. I might be able to pop up the right one. We'll see.
one part of the workpiece is thin, and the other part has more mass to it.
Uh-huh.
Uh, if you put it in a gas forge, the entire piece comes up the same heat.
Yeah.
Well, if you're trying to work at a high heat to turn around and work on that heavier, more massive area, you
Yeah.
may actually burn the small area.
Right.
So being able to isolate that heat and control the temperature exactly to the range you want it to be in is so important.
Oh, that's not one. Yeah, it's this one. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, that's see how the heat is localized
Yeah.
to that area there that I'd be working on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people mistakenly think that more heat's better. And even with just like from some of my blades lately, when I forge like a chef's knife, I'll do an upset heel. Um, I'll upset the heel to kind of create kind of somewhat of a guard kind of effect, kind of like what you do and what Joe Kiesler is known for. Um, and when what I don't have a coal forge, so I have to I put I try to isolate where the heat needs to be as best as I can, but it heats up way more material than I would like. In fact, I wish I had a torch available to me to just so I can have more isolated heats, because there are benefits to work close to a colder area and being able to have more control of how that moves versus that whole thing being hot and how easily it smushes and smashes around, right? And
Right.
so yeah, so that's probably the next tool that I should get, is honestly just like get an oxy propane setup together so I can have a torch to be able to do some of that isolated heat work, because especially when it gets into upsetting material, it does become very challenging if basically the whole piece is getting heated up, because when the whole blade is heated up, you put it in the vise, sure, but you start hitting on it, and inside the jaws of that vise, that knife can start wobbling around versus being cold and just staying where it needs to be.
That's right.
And
The cold forge is basically your torch. It's
yeah,
stationary, and
right,
you're moving the workpiece to and within it. So
right,
it's uh, the fire pot is basically your torch,
yeah,
and so you can adjust the intensity of the heat by how you spread and distribute the coke that's
mm,
hot. So if your fire burns down too much, it becomes a really small, extremely hot flame.
I
And
gotcha.
so that's the danger when people are working on a project. They progress and progress, the fire degrades. And while your work progresses through its stages, all of a sudden it's more vulnerable to extreme heat because it's smaller in cross section and your fire is degraded. So when you get to a critical point in your uh, process, you really want to stop and rebuild your fire.
Mm,
Get rid of the ashes, uh,
yeah.
rebuild, and coke up a new bed
Oh, interesting.
of heat so that it's more broad or appropriate, at least appropriate to what you're trying to do.
Sure.
Because if you just let happen what nature tells it to do, gravity and the coke, and you don't feed it and you don't recoke, you don't keep it banked up, it's going to collapse, and you're going to have a hole there where you've got way too much air, which is oxygen.
Yeah.
It's just like that torch. It's going to oxidize more. There's going to be some spots of extreme heat, and then all of a sudden you burn your piece in two.
Right.
So keep that's that learning curve that I referred to earlier.
Sure. Well, I'm probably in the next 5 or 10 years. I have a friend of mine. He's a friend of the family. He's gonna be. I think he's slowing down on his forging, and he's told me, I want you to have this, and it's a hand crank coal forge. But I don't know anything about how to operate the thing. So I think if I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna try to come take a class with you somewhere sometime because I really admire and respect the way you use the heat, and the work that you're doing is not too dissimilar from what I would want to do for my chef's knives in some ways. And so I would really like to come work with you and learn from you because you're doing what I want to be able to do with my own, with if I had my own coal forge. So expect a call in a few years. Maybe sooner than later, honestly. Even though I don't have it yet, I have access to it, and so I don't have to necessarily have it at my shop to be playing with it. And when it comes to ventilation, like you were saying, when we would get the coal into the forge initially, how much smoke it puts out, it was amazing. I was actually incredibly surprised at how smoky it was in there, because I think where the barn that the forge is in is like a 5,000 square foot barn. It's got a 20-foot peak. It's like a gimbal roof, and it was it filled the whole place. He doesn't have any high up ventilation, unfortunately, or it's very limited, and so the whole upper 10 feet of the roof was just full of smoke. It was pretty rough, actually, but it's amazing how smoky that stuff gets. So I want to. I mean, I guess you've always done this kind of stuff where you're using these blacksmithing techniques in your knife making. When was it that you got to that point and you've kind of found a style? Because I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people, and we talked about this a little bit, but is to kind of develop their own style. And so at what point, or what was it about the knife making process or the tools that you were using that you found um, could help you to distinguish your work from others? Probably not necessarily just to be different, um, but definitely different from others. Was it just like there was a part of the process, like using a coal forge, that just really intrigued you, and so you just like dialed way into that to see how far you could push it to use that tool uh, to forge your work? I mean, and I have some examples of some of your as forged pieces, and they are astonishing. Really, basically the blade needs to be ground, maybe the slightest, tiniest bit of adjustment around the profile. I mean, here's one right here. There's a little, I think maybe a 6 or 8 inch Bowie or Hunter, and like all you got to do. I mean, the spine along the spine and then down the swage all looks great. Maybe there's a little bit of tuning a profile down at the tip to have a nice sharp point, and then but you already have bevels pretty well forged in, so it's just a little bit of grinding and you're good to go. Like it's really incredible what you're able to accomplish in your coal forge, and this is through the coal forge. Am I correct?
It is.
Yeah. And the other thing that really astonishes me, and this must be, this probably gets into controlling that flame or controlling that fire, because you always have such clean surfaces, and that also might be brushing
A little bit.
or planishing, and that's something I still fight against, honestly. um but yeah, what are some, I guess, simple tips that you could offer people, whether they're using propane or coal, as they're forging, to kind of keep their material cleaner and to help get more, like, to economize their material, really, like you're doing with these pieces. You're using all of it, and it's not kind of a squished out blob. It is a blade. It
Mm-hmm.
just needs to be ground and heat treated and then ground, and you're good to go. You're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, there's two things you need to be able to do uh, to control your finish. And one is, like you mentioned, planishing. You need to be able to know the temperature to planish. There's forging temperature, which is those high heats where you're actually squishing and moving metal. That's forging temperature. But when the temperature starts lowering and it's appropriate, you're at a point to where it's time to smooth the surface. Well, as it continues to lower, you begin your planishing phase, which is you're just patting basically with flat blows. You're not using the corner of your hammer. You're not forging. You're planishing or smoothing the surface. And what that does, it removes any loose scale, which are the ferrous oxides that form on the surface. You're removing that, and you're actually hitting the surface of the steel then. And those oxides that were there that you just kind of chip away and they flake off, they won't embed themselves into the surface, and it'll make a smoother surface. And the steel will resist the hammer, which you need. You need that resistance at a
Oh,
planishing
interesting.
stage. You need that resistance because you're not forging anymore. You're just smoothing the surface. So the depth of your blow is just on the skin of the steel. And that's how you smooth it. But another way, of course, is the condition of your fire.
Right.
And that's whether you're using gas or coal. It needs to be a reducing atmosphere. You need more fuel than air.
Okay.
So it won't oxidize as bad. We know we do that when we're welding.
Right.
We want the fuel and the oxygen to be burning almost at the same rate. Almost at the same rate. Just a tad more fuel so that all the oxygen is consumed within the chamber. And
Right.
it's actually the flames are licking out, reaching out to get more oxygen.
Right.
So that keeps your scale to a minimum. Now, in a coal fire, that is going to be a more difficult to do because you're not in a closed environment unless you make the frog house, as they call it, make a chamber with a hole punctured into it, which is you can do that. And a lot of people make their Damascus, they go in
Really?
a chamber to get their make their welds to set their welds so that it's a reducing atmosphere. So you would wet the coal and make it clump together, stick together, and then you excavate a hole in that mound, and you distribute your coke so that you got a good bed of coke that consumes the oxygen as it comes through that matrix of coke.
Yeah.
And that just creates a glowing chamber. That's just like a glowing chamber in your gas forge. So you want to control your oxygen and learn to planish, and that's at a little bit lower temperature. So if you just go in there out of habit and go in there and come to the same color and come out and you use that same color, that same heat in your workpiece.
Yeah.
For every step and stage of your blade, you're going to end up with a lot of scale on it.
Right.
And also, your hammer blows are going to be deeper. And when you're grinding, you're going to find that there's always hammer marks, deep hammer marks. So you can't smooth it out if you're working at those really high. You can't do it as well.
Sure.
If you're working at those really high heats, you got to lower your heat just a little bit and smooth it out.
I got you. Occasionally, from time to time, like, yeah, if scale has built up, I try to, once the material's gotten down close to where I'm ready to start planishing it, I'll actually, and this is kind of a technique that I'm emulating. I mean, I don't know. I've never been taught this by anybody, but I've seen in Japanese forging where they will hammer the blades into like a wooden post or a stump or something like that that has a little bit of a curve to intentionally deform and bend the material to try to encourage that forge scale to pop off. And then I go back under, and then I go at lower temperatures and I work on straightening that all out, and I'm kind of planishing all at the same time. And because it's so hot and still malleable at that point, it's very easy to straighten it right back out often. And I'm curious, are you changing your hammer too? Like, are you going or are you just controlling your strikes, using the same hammer and just being careful to hit lighter?
I'm using the same hammer usually. Now, in that picture you just posted,
Yeah.
where the plunge is, I will often go to a hammer that has a more radiused edge, so you
Okay.
can see that a sharp edged hammer wouldn't be rolled up the way it is. It's kind of
Right.
ramped up. That way you
Yeah.
can, when you grind it, you got more options.
Sure.
You can sneak in there and get that plunge the way you want it. So yeah, so you see that color right there? That's what I call a very low red.
Okay.
That's planishing temperature. Uh, Maybe the conclusion of the planishing temperature, because I just laid it down there and took a picture of it.
Sure.
So forging is going to be orange and up.
Okay.
Orange and up. And planishing is red to low red.
Okay.
And now you see, I don't know if you can tell, but I used a wire brush on that. You run
Oh, I can see a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the blade along the length. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did use a wire brush, but historically, at some point, wire brush wasn't used. It was planishing. And
Wow. Really?
right, yeah, and also a scraper. They Before wire brushes was in vogue,
Mm-hmm.
a scraper, which was like a chisel that's just with a single bevel on the end with a handle on the other end,
Mm-hmm.
and you use that to scrape. At the point you'd use a wire brush, you'd use that to scrape some of the loose scale off.
Okay.
And that's historically what the wire brush took over later, you know.
I see. So they weren't using like the cheap barbecue scrapers that you can get at the Ace Hardware or something
And as
like
soon as
that.
you touch it to something orange, it balls up and it's not good
Yeah, exactly. It no longer wants to scrape.
anymore.
Nah, I feel like I've seen those because they usually would live maybe in the hardy hole or something like that, right? Or in a vise nearby for scraping.
No, it's a handheld.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's got a wooden handle. It's like a chisel.
Okay.
For instance, you could probably use a 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch chisel
Yeah.
um, as a scraper,
Oh, interesting.
but you need to make one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cheating.
That's cheating. All right. Um, so some of you are, so like I've said before, this is a very creative process for you, and you've done a lot of cool exploration in forms to create things that I honestly I've never really seen from other makers, and especially with some of your guard work, and of course the X-Ray. If people aren't familiar with the X-Ray, I'm sure you can look up the hashtag XRHEA, and you'll see. Also, where can people find you on Instagram? Go ahead.
Instagram, it's Lin_Ray_knife maker.
If you come up with any other Lin Rheas, those are all stolen accounts.
That's right. Yeah.
Sadly, you've been targeted so many times for.
A couple of times at least.
Yeah. Well, it's two
Yeah.
times more than me. It's so bizarre. Like and nobody's doing anything with those pages. So it's like, why did you even do that in the first place? Why don't you just give it back? So I can at least delete it or something.
Yeah.
Decommission it.
Yeah,
But I'm
that's
not doing
pretty.
anything. But anyways, so on your page on Instagram, people can see the X-ray, and you have many, many, many examples of it. I'll pop up one right here, but if you can describe it, this is I'm kind of, I don't have the handle in the picture. Let's see, wait, is this it? Yeah, this is the one I believe I use for the calendar actually, or one similar to this.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're looking at is a large buoy or camp style blade with a I don't even know what you would. I wanted to call it a skeletonized handle, but that's not what it is. It's like it's steel has been wrapped back around and jointed back to basically where the ricasso of the knife is. And like, tell me what was kind of your process for developing this, and what was the impetus for creating something like that?
Okay. I think it was around 2015. I took a class on historic lock making, and
Mm,
Peter Ross was my instructor, and it was a one-on-one class, and which is I highly recommend
okay,
someone of his caliber teaching you, especially one-on-one if possible. But that
right.
was a memorable class, um, and I drove to his place in North Carolina and back, and on the way back, I started thinking about the techniques we were using.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in making the locks, and how could I
Mm,
incorporate that into my my work. And there's what you're seeing now is some of the other objects that he showed me how to make, the scissors and pliers,
right.
box joint pliers, which each one of those has its own recipes, as it were, to
Sure.
make the joints and the logic behind some of the parts and locations and curves, and they all make sense when you
Right.
learn it. But I was thinking, and in fact, we used a lot of mortise and tenon joinery in the lock.
Okay.
Um, so the tenons would go through a hole, a mortise, just like in woodworking. And
Sure.
then you would, instead of pegs or wedges, you would pin the tenon on the end and lock it in place,
Wow.
fasten it in place. Not making a joke, but we're working on locks. But so I wanted to do that. So that long drive home, I started thinking about how can I make or incorporate this
Yeah.
in a one piece steel knife. How can I mean, lots of questions I had to answer. First of all, I had to, how can it look good? How can it feel good in the hand? How can it be functional and not just be another novelty that nobody wants to use because it hurts your hand, or
Mm,
um,
right.
it feels odd or weak or something like that?
Sure.
So those are the questions I had to sort of answer and check off my list. So to do that requires a lot of building and rebuilding in my mind before I ever even picked up a piece of steel and hammer, you know.
Right.
So I started with that small one that was in that last photo,
Yeah.
that was on top. The small, uh, basically what you have there is a scroll that is fastened to itself, and it's
Sure.
adapted to hold a blade. So that's your handle for the blade. And there's some points and features about that I insist on myself because it adds to the comfort and the look of it.
Sure.
It makes it understandable. There's some things people can make uh, that, quite honestly, I don't understand. And in other words, I don't understand the logic or the reasoning or why you put forth so much effort to make
I
that
gotcha.
object if it can't be fulfilled in some kind of a functional or aesthetic manner. You know,
Right.
so I had to deal with those things, and it took me about, I don't know, a couple 3 years to be able to be satisfied that I come up with the right, not just design, because you can't create a design and that uh, that by itself. You have to have a process to get there.
Hmm.
a forging process, step-by-step logical forging process that's repeatable. That's one of the qualities of a good design.
Right.
One indication of a good design is repeatable and the outcome is predictable. So I think I felt like I achieved that with that small knife.
Yeah.
Well, I said, well, what about a Bowie knife? And I worked and I worked and I had a convoluted process I wasn't happy with. I was managed to get a few knives made like that, but the failure rate was too high. It wasn't reasonable.
Oh.
So it became necessary for me to rethink my process. And so I did. And I believe now I've got the process down. It's much more predictable. And there's some tiny subtleties of the shape that can be adjusted according to taste, but for the most part, I think I've got it down.
I got a photo here, which is part of the progression. This is a picture you've shared on social media, so hopefully you're all right with me sharing it here. But I believe this is, and I can't remember what you call this part of the knife. I mean, would you also refer to this style knife as a self-handled knife? Or what would you?
This is a preform, is what I call it.
Okay.
A preform of the knife. So what you're seeing is all of the elements of the knife that are in place without the bends taking place. Right. So you can see that there's a tenon that's on that, what I call a standoff. The standoff holds the tenon, and it also separates the ricasso from the handle. It's not just jammed and mashed down against it.
You don't just forge weld that?
No, and it's actually a mechanical.
This might be a better picture to help.
Yeah, and when that goes on, and of course you at some point nearly all the points that you're working on this, it's hot. It's at least an orange forging heat.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to show in that angle, that view, how the pommel is in place.
Yep.
The underneath part of the handle that your fingers bear against is toward us in the image. And notice how the handle ties into the ricasso. It's like a T.
Right.
Like this. This image. I mean, this
like an I-beam.
Like an I-beam. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a T-beam. A T-post is like you use around the farm. A T-post to hold barbed wire.
Yep.
That's a good. That's a good illustration. It's stiff. It's strong. It's integrated. The blade is a projection of the handle, so it's very strong.
Yeah, it adds rigidity to that transition point, because that's probably one of the bigger concerns that people might have about that the steel wrapping back around, is that the blade might just completely bend off away from the handle, or the handle from the blade. But with that interaction between kind of the ricasso as it goes down into the wrap, or what becomes the handle, it helps to make that a lot more rigid and tougher and stronger, like you're saying.
Well, what it needs to be is sufficiently strong, and I use that term a lot, because if it's too strong, what do you have? You have it heavy.
Right.
It's too heavy.
Right.
But sufficient means that whatever that you can do with that knife, as you would do with any knife that's sufficiently strong, you can do with this knife, and maybe more. But it's that handle and that tie-in is sufficient to operate that blade.
Yeah.
That blade. If it's a long blade, I have a little bit more tie-in. The ramp comes back farther. There's more connection. See how that ramp goes back a
Yeah,
little bit farther? That's a very strong connection.
absolutely.
Yeah, and also the as the handle strap progresses toward the end, out if it was stretched out longer, it gets thinner and thinner to a point.
Yeah.
So it also um, gets lighter.
Oh, right. Oh, that
So
makes sense.
yeah, so you don't want more weight where you don't need more weight. It's and strength and weight I'm kind of using to interchange. So sufficiently strong is my that is what I have in my mind when I'm forging that out.
Right. Well, in this picture, it looks like the guard is super thick, but I think part of it, and is a very subtle detail, but very important, like you're saying, for comfort, is that that strap, that handle strap, is gently curved, which we saw kind of better illustrated in the previous image. And so, and because of foreshortening, I think that portion where the guard's at on that piece looks like it's heavier than it is when it's actually probably very nicely tapered out to where the guard terminates.
Yeah, it looks thicker than it is,
Right.
uh, but when you put that curve, that cup into a piece of metal, it like exponentially strengthens it.
Right.
It's just there's no way that the average human anyway, that's likely to be handling that knife is going to be able to. You certainly can't feel any flex
Hmm.
as you would a common Viking knife or a knife that we commonly think of as a blacksmith knife. It's got it. I pinched my finger. I mean, I made those things too,
Yeah.
and it's flexy and pinches your finger, and it feels insecure in use. Yeah, it'll work, but I wanted something that's going to work on par with a conventional knife. I wanted a design that I thought would be really, if it comes down to it, crunch time, this knife would hold up when a lot of other knives won't hold up.
Right. Well, I think you make a good point because that is probably, if people are only listening to this podcast, you can liken this probably closest to what would be considered a traditional blacksmith knife, where you draw out a rein out the backside of the knife where the tang would normally be, and then it usually gets rolled back around and scrolled back over. But this is a much more secure and solid construction, and especially with that gentle curve in the rein or the handle strap, that helps to create again more of that rigidity and solidness, and especially with that joint, that tenon, and how those come back together and interact. And again, that's where the coal forge is probably really helpful. Is that when you're setting that, you can really isolate that, and you probably potentially even get in there with a torch
Oh,
to
absolutely.
heat
If
that
you
up.
need to, do whatever it takes to make a successful knife.
Yeah.
Um, so making things hard on yourself, uh, that only goes so far. I mean, it can the challenge you set for yourself can be too extreme. So if you're just getting started, make it successful. Get some of these under your belt, as it were,
Right.
um, and then tighten up your limitations. These are self-imposed. Now, I don't mean to say that I expect everybody to do it the same way I do.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes um, I set restrictions, and I do it because it's cool weather. I've got an afternoon to kill, and I just want to make something and only use hand tools. Our friend Nick Rossi often teaches a class on uh, no electric tool
Oh,
knife making,
sure. Yeah.
and so that kind of philosophy again is where I would go
Yeah.
on sometimes, but a lot of times, time is important to me as anyone else.
Sure.
I
Um,
need to take a quick break if you
oh
don't
yeah.
mind. So
All
let's
right.
just if you don't.
We'll pause, and you take your time, and when you get back, we'll be ready to go again.
Be right back.
All right. I'll talk to the audience here.
Okay.
So yeah, so some of these pieces, again, the X-Rhea they're just so phenomenal, and it really speaks to the foresight and the planning that we were talking about, especially when it comes to the actual forging progression. This is a finished piece that I have up here right now, and you can see how that the back portion of the blade interacts with the rein or the handle strap, and how it comes back. Gosh, what is that? Almost halfway through the handle, maybe 40% or so into the spine of the handle. But again, the way that the handle is gently curved. I'm going to pop that picture up again. This is with the rein, or again, whichever you want to call it, the rein, the handle strap. I call it a rein because if you think about tongs, you have your jaws of the tong, and then the handle, that long part that we hold on to, is the rein. So before it's wrapped around and bent into place and all that, you might typically refer to that as a rein. And I think it's just so great that you've taken and I talk to people about how I want to learn how to make folders, and I want to learn how to use a cold forge, and I want to learn how all these different styles and all these different knives. And it's not that I necessarily want to make them. Like, I want to learn how to make straight razors. Maybe I'll make one for myself or for fun, one or two, but culinary knives are always going to be my jam. That's going to be always be where I live. But I'm interested in learning more skills and technique, and then trying to figure out how I can bring that back to my bread and butter. And I love that you took that knowledge and understanding. And what was the teacher's name again that you took the locksmith class from?
His name's Peter Ross.
Peter Ross.
Peter was the master of the shop at Colonial Williamsburg and Anderson Forge, and he was there for 20 something years. And he's renowned for his historic skills. And that place, that village, historic village, is no matter what craft you're in, it's a wonderful place to visit.
Yeah. I got one more X-Rhea I want to show because I believe it's the sword. And it comes and wraps back around into a D-guard, so it's actually pinned or riveted or tenon in two places. And you can see, like you were saying, the longer the blade, the farther back that intersection between the spine side of the handle and what would kind of be kind of the tang. It's much longer, and this one goes at least halfway through the handle, if not possibly a little bit more. But it's just it's so smart and so cool and so creative to work in kind of this minimalist way, like you're saying, to create something so intricate and elegant, but still have this kind of warmth to it that when you see it at first, I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing. But it still has a warmth to it that I would feel comfortable and drawn to pick it up and to actually handle it. Sometimes I think some work is, there's tons of actually absolutely stunning work out there, but I would rather just look at it. I'm not necessarily drawn to hold it and to touch it, but because of that forged texture, there's a warmth to it, to me, that that is inviting, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I when I first started making knives, Joe Kiesler was my first instructor, and of course he
Wow.
taught brute de forge.
Yeah.
And I still use that term for even this sword and my X-rays.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I
I
use
would
that
too.
term. Um, I don't recommend it for newer makers. Uh, you do what you want, but if you want to go for your JS or especially your MS stamp, your Master Smith ranking, um, I would just, I believe I would concentrate on fit and finish and hand sanding and all the things that make you qualified to take that test and pass. So this is a rabbit trail you may go down that'll take you kind of away from that, or but but I have to say that there's a misconception about the brute to forge. A good brute to forge finish is kind of difficult to do.
Sure.
It's not easy to do that. A lot of people think that, well, what he's doing, he's taking a hammer and he's scarring up the face of it and he's hammering for that and he's making it look forged.
Of
No,
course. Yeah. No. How could any human hand do something like that?
yeah. So for it to look well done, brute to forge and well done, it does take some hammer skills.
Yes.
And you can imagine that as a smith, we try our best to avoid shuts and weak spots.
Yeah.
So deep hammer marks and hot shuts and places where it's inconsistent, it's up and down.
Yeah.
That just inherently brings a certain amount of weakness to the and danger to the piece.
Okay.
Because in the quenching or in the use, it could create a stress riser there in those places. So I want it to be smooth.
Right.
As smooth as I can get it. And there's going to be some imperfections. That's just, again, we're human. But
I'm pulling that. This is a hunter, right? Or a gentleman's buoy?
It's a little vest buoy blade.
Vest buoy. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's probably 5 inches.
5 inches. Okay. But this is a perfect example of what you're talking about. And I can see you doing that very, very easily. I mean, not easily, but I can see how this is completely done by hand with a hammer, or can be.
And it is easy once you get in your mind that there's a standard. You set a standard for the finish and the shape. And you what you do is you take the time and go through the effort using all the techniques you know. And it doesn't matter about the time. You take it.
Yeah.
You take the time and you go to the effort and you succeed. And then you do it again. And each time you do it after that, it becomes your standard is set. You get faster.
Sure.
You don't want to work fast and try to up your standards within that time constraint. That's not going to work. That's the when it comes to the forged in fire and the way they do things, they have a time constraint first.
Right.
And of course, you could ask any of them, and I've spoken to them a lot, and they realize that it's like having one hand tied behind your back when you're working. That is a constraint that's hard to overcome.
Absolutely.
So to get good at something, you have to go through the motions slowly, but be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get faster, and you get faster, and you get faster, and you get faster.
It's all about reps. I think I often, when I'm talking to people, it comes back to repetitions, getting reps in, and not, it's not just doing the reps, because you can kind of just half pay attention and still get the work done and get the reps in. But what's key is that focused attention to the details, and that's where you're going to exponentiate what you're learning from the process. The more focused you are, the more dialed in you are, the quicker you're going to get to that refinement that you're looking for. You still got to put in reps, but the more you I only made knives for 3 years before I started making my chef's knives. That's really not that long before getting to a point where you're achieving a high level work.
It's individual.
Yeah. But I was just going to say the reps that I put in before I got to that point, working for an established maker, and we were working in a kind of a production environment, really helped me to get those repetitions in, so that when it came to me doing my own work, I already had made hundreds and ground hundreds of blades and ground hundreds and sculpted hundreds of handles, so that it was so second nature to me that I hardly had to think about it. My next step once I got into my own knife making was learning how to forge, and that took probably a solid 3 years, 3 or 4 years before I got to a place where I was just like I didn't even have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a it's an interesting thing that when, before I was making knives, I thought I was had a pretty good understanding of a lot of things in life, as you mentioned earlier, I was sort of late in life. I mean, I was around 40, somewhere along in there,
Yeah.
41, 2. Um, kids grown. I can concentrate on something I wanted to do for me.
Yeah.
Um, but this has taught me more than anything else discipline. It's taught me
Hmm.
discipline because you can't fool that piece of steel. You can't just will it into shape because you
No.
want it to, or you can't have it to have the right grain structure just because you think it should. No, you got to. It's I've used the term was like a marriage. You have to meet it halfway. You know
Hmm.
what it will do and it's willing to do, but you have to create an environment or a condition
Right.
and work with it and do your part before it actually will reach its potential.
I like that.
And so we have to work within the limitations of the material, and we have to ask it to do the right thing. We have to help it along the way, and it works. It'll pay us back for that.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. I wanted to throw up another example. First, this is the finished piece, and this is one that I believe you did recently.
I just finished it. I mean, like not yesterday, but the day before.
And if for people watching the video, I want you to really pay attention to the profile of this blade. Really kind of look at it. Just take a few seconds. See how the clip drops down, how there's a nice consistent curve down the spine. It actually has a little scroll at the tail or at the pommel of the handle. Um, and then at the front, you can see a little dip for ricasso,
Hmm.
and then you have your edge. Now, this is the piece as forged. It's got all those details in there, even the little dip for the ricasso, the curve along the spine, the clip, the edge. I mean, there's just maybe the slightest bit of profile tuning,
Hmm.
but this thing's there. And and it's clean, it's nice and smooth and everything. And it's just, and there's a certain sense of satisfaction that comes from doing that. And I know that I have a lot of friends, especially in the culinary knife world, who, well, I guess also in the outdoor knife as well, who are doing more production work, which is completely understandable. And so I think for me at least, when I am forging a knife and I'm forging it, what I would call brute to forge, to really close to what a lot of people call it forge to finish. I call it forge to heat treat because then I will just heat treat as forged. Um, and so, but that's taking that edge material down to about a 16th of an inch, all along the edge, a nice distal taper from the ricasso out to the tip, and all that good stuff. And it takes time, and and it's not easy, but more than anything, I need to do that practice to check in with myself to make sure, not that I still got it, but just that um it's important to me that having that skill to be able to do that. Now, of course, when you get into production, that's probably not the most productive way to make knives, but I think for people who are pursuing this as like this is their passionate pursuit, taking on these challenges. And I think I see sometimes where you start with a chunk of steel, you just weigh it on the scale, and based on the weight, you already have kind of an idea of what size knife you can get out of it and everything. And so I think it's a really good personal challenge, and ultimately it ends up making great knives with time and practice. Especially if you can get the clean, brute to forge, planished, beautifully planished finishes like what Lin's getting on his work. Um, yeah, it's worth it. And even in your finished pieces, I actually have another image here you sent me. is a brute to forge, and it's the brute to forge is along the spine as well as in the ricasso area, which is, I feel like you don't see a lot of this kind of work from mastersmiths, and I think it's really cool that you intentionally forged the material in a way that you can preserve it. And I think that's part of the beauty of the brute forge is it's a relic of the process of making the knife, because sure, you can forge a knife shape and then just grind everything away. You lose kind of like that step. And so what you're kind of doing when you make a brute de forge is you're preserving that step to show, and it's kind of a testament to the maker's abilities and skills, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, this is where I was talking about earlier. If I had in the hand sanded parts, the clip and the bevels, if I had some big old hammer marks just here and there in it, that is the part that I'm saying I would not want on that knife.
Yep.
I want it to be in a controlled manner. I just want to put the black where I want it and take it away where I don't want it.
Yep. Yeah. Let's see. I got another one here. I think it's another sword or maybe a hunting knife. It's a long, let's see, where is it? This is from the tang towards the tip. Can you tell me a little bit about this piece? I have a few different angles of this one.
Yeah, that was one of my ideas. I haven't finished that yet. It's one of my ideas.
Okay.
That I had, and what I was doing was honestly, what I was trying to do was make a guard, and
I think you did it.
I didn't care on the blade end what the blade was going to be. I
Okay.
didn't care what the tang was going to be. What I was doing was working on my tooling and my techniques to accomplish a guard and what I would consider a spacer, all integrated into a blade. And from that point on, I would decide what I would make. So I did that in the middle of the work piece.
Right.
And then I said, well, it looks like, what does this look? Asked myself, what does this look like? What would it go on? What could I do to the,
yeah.
And then I said, it sort of looks Suba.
Right.
Does it look close enough to being a Suba that I can make a blade that sort of, like a Wakasashi or
sure
Tanto or what have you, have that general look. Of course, it has a drop choil. That's not accurate.
Sure.
But again, that's I was driven by something different than what maybe a lot of people might think I was. I didn't have the overall shape of this knife, this blade. Sword, it would be considered short sword. I can't even remember now. I think it's a 17 or 18-inch blade.
I'd say that's a short sword. That's probably, like a Wakasashi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just kind of squeezed down and drew some out and got it out of my way, and squeezed this down and drew it out of my way. And this thing in the middle is what I made the guard.
Right.
I just started working on the guard, but get to the degree that I had to move this metal and this metal to be able to work on the guard. That's the only time I moved and drew out the blade and the tang. So when it started getting in my way, I'd squeeze it on down or forge it on down and get it out of my way.
Sure.
Until it finally, I had revealed the guard to myself. I could see it. And then, so I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do with the blade. And I started refining the shape of the blade. So it was still thick. It was still wasn't clear what it was going to be. It wasn't even clear to me.
Right.
So this is one of those rare things where I didn't have a plan for the overall piece. I just had an idea. How can I move this material? Can I actually squeeze it down and pull it out into something something that looked like a hat brim? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
It does look like a hat brim.
So I had to bring it out. It wasn't as big as that is wide. So
Sure.
that took some cross painting and maybe some chasing.
With like a chisel kind of tool.
Yeah, like a it would be a top fuller or a rounding
Oh, yep.
top
Yep.
fuller to pull. But I had to back it up with something. I mean, it had to have a flat something gripping the blade side.
Right.
That wasn't too terribly sharp. It had to have some radius to it. So I had to create some tools. So, I mean, it's almost like, man, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody. It's almost to that point. Don't try this at home.
Okay.
Kind of a thing. So
Okay.
I was willing to make a tool to try to accommodate this because I wanted to get this out of my system. I wanted to see if I could actually make this shape in steel.
Right.
It's pretty funny when you look back on it. I just could not try it. I had to try it.
Sure.
And I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I could pull that material down. And believe me, I have a bucket or scrap pile is where with some things in it that it's downright embarrassing, things I've tried and it didn't work. Or I thought what I really found out was this is so impractical that I don't even want to talk about it. You know, it's something that I had to get out of my system, see if this is a viable part of any process. I'll tell you what kind of got me started on trying these things is at the blacksmith shop at the museum where I used to be on staff, the Historic Arkansas Museum.
Yeah.
We have a regular day where we get together and we have show and tell. Well, we've had everything from cannons to matchlocks to spurs to suits of armor.
Right.
Weaponry of all kinds. And some of these things you can look at and you can almost see, well, you can see the welds, the scarf welds.
Oh, cool.
You can see how it was made. So we can also discern from just studying it how this was done over here, and it was separate from the main body, and it was added by welding, forge welding, to the main body at this juncture, and you can see the weld.
Right.
So scarf weld. So it gets you to thinking the way they did. You start to see the way they were thinking and their mental process. So they had to create a process. So they had to think it all out before it could ever be done. And,
sure.
And you're seeing the results 200-300 years later.
Jeez.
From all that thinking that they done. So it helped me to see that for me to get into that kind of a mindset, I've got to be willing to, first of all, go through that thinking process. And then I've got to be willing to make what tooling I need and try it.
Right.
And all that takes time and to some extent money, material,
sure,
and so forth. So and time you're experimenting is more or less research and development. So I just have to say to myself, I've got to satisfy this curiosity that's in me. I've got to try it.
Yeah.
Some of it works, some of it just don't.
No, I love it. And integral guards have intrigued me for a very long time, especially since the first one. I think the first one I ever saw was from Adam DeRozier's, and he didn't show the process, or maybe he showed maybe a couple steps in his process, but he doesn't show the whole process. But part of the fun for me is kind of puzzling it out. Like you're talking about having kind of the spatial awareness. So you're seeing the finished thing, and you're kind of, for me, I work backwards.
Yeah.
And then I play it forward again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I think that actually could work. And I've done a couple now. I haven't finished them out, but they're not too bad for, my first 2 attempts at trying to make this guard. I actually have one that I haven't finished forging, and I think I really like your and it, now that I'm thinking about it, I might be too far along to be able to be able to draw out the lug a little bit more, because right now I just have like this tiny little, maybe 3/16 or a quarter of an inch lug, and that's not enough. I feel like for an 8-inch buoy. And so but because the blade's already forged, there are some limitations to how I can get in there and try to clean that up. I have an idea of how I can, um, but it does make it a little bit more challenging than it would have been if I had done that before I forged out the blade. And that's where some of those systems and processes, an order of operations, I guess is maybe a better term, that you have to hit in a particular order, because once you get past this point, you can't go back. Or if you do want to go back, it's very challenging or difficult to go back. But oftentimes there's just kind of a point of no return. On
Yeah, you can paint yourself to a corner.
Yep.
And there's no way out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you're tight on time, or not tight on time, but you have a specific time you got to get going. There are a few more things that I want to talk to you about that you sent me, actually, photographs of your intermediate forging. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the intermediate forging? I've actually never heard that term before. And
it didn't exist as far as I know.
Okay, perfect. That's what we're here for.
I made it up.
You made it up.
Yeah, I made that up.
I don't know if the best thing. So I have a few pictures that you sent me. If the best thing is to jump in and show the finished thing and then step backwards, or go the other way around.
Okay.
Let's start with this photograph here. It's a buoy, it's the guard and spacers. And so can you tell me? Yeah.
The spacer, now what you're seeing, that piece of machinery there, is nothing but the guard clamp. It's pushing forward. Got everything forced forward up into the guard and then into the ricasso. Well, that first piece you come to that has what looks like a wedding band, on a gun barrel, an old gun barrel, the carving and filing, that would be called a wedding band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. And so you see a spacer in front of it and one behind it.
Yep.
And those are just plain spacers that fit inside the wedding band. The wedding band has a web inside it that those two pieces bear against, and then there's alignment pins that go to align them up. And the alignment pins are mostly there for my benefit when I'm forging the wedding band.
Yep.
And you'll see in the next pictures or two how that wedding band is formed, and there's variations of the shape of the wedding band. The wedding band can be smooth, or it can be scalloped and turned into, some little rosettes.
Okay. I'm going to go to a screen. I'm going to pull this down, and I'm actually going to go straight to a screen share to the photos that you sent me. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll pop through these. So this is the one we were just looking at. So now we're back at the beginning.
We're at the forge. And what that is a progression on the same bar of stock, where I just progressively, I wanted to make all the major parts for this Bowie knife. So the first one, the heaviest one, is the butt cap.
Right.
So it has it being a takedown, it has a hole punched.
Oh, right.
And so those cut marks were done with a side grinder just to differentiate and put boundaries on each of those parts, so that I could see where to punch the holes and get accurate, if you see what I'm saying.
Yep.
So I punched the hole for the butt cap, then punched the hole for the largest spacer. So we're getting smaller. So the largest spacer, that would be the yellow one, would be the wedding band,
right,
as it were, that particular part. And then the next one, the two green ones, would be the matching set front and back that would be against forward and back of the wedding band. And of course, I'd put them all together, drill holes through them, put alignment pins so that they wouldn't move.
Yeah.
And then,
and did you you drifted those slots or punched those slots?
yeah, I punched those slots.
Okay. Ready for the next slide?
Yeah.
All right.
So the reason why you see both of those matching spacers glued to the other one is so I can get a good visual on it and drill through all of them at the same time. And there's a pin in my hand there. That's the 3/32 alignment pin.
Yep.
So one of those would be picked up and actually just lifted and moved around to the other side of that bigger one.
Right.
You got a front and back, and then those are pinned together. Not just pinned, but there may be another image where I've got a bolt through it. Yeah, that's where I could the two green arrows. That's a front and back, and the yellow one is the middle one. It's quite a bit bigger. It's got a margin that's even all the way around, bigger than the other two.
Right.
And those are alignment pins, and those pins need to be. They don't need to stick out to any degree. They need to. If I do any peening on them at all, it's just very light. I'm going to push them back out later.
I got you. All right. Next slide. Oh, let's see. Jump back to the email. I think maybe these pictures. Oh,
that's another example of a finished one. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a different process, similar but different.
It's the same process with a different outcome.
Okay.
Because I cut that center that would have been the wedding band. I cut it into a bunch of little prongs. And individually, I worked them down a little at a time. You can see that the ones on the lower side of the image haven't been touched by the torch or the hammer.
Right.
The ones on the top, I've started working those down.
Right.
And I don't want to completely forge them down to its complete flatness because they'll start overlapping one another. All I want them to do is to bump each other and push against one another.
Okay.
So if you get one of them completely down, the other one's going to lay on top of it, and that's not good.
I'm trying to. Sorry. I'm trying to find the right picture that has. This isn't it. This is a different one.
That's a completely that's ground and filed in. That's not an example of the intermediate forging there.
Yeah, I don't know if I have so the one that's bigger, out of the pair of three, it ends up getting heated and upset.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, but you noticed in that picture where I had the torch aimed at it and it's turning red.
Yep.
That I've got it in a vise, but I've got it. What I have is an all thread run through it with a washer and nut.
Okay.
On either side, and that contains all three of those layers.
Okay.
With the bounded by the nut and washer on either side, tightened up.
Yeah.
And so those alignment pins are there just to keep them relative to each other.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is putting pressure on the jaws on the end of the all thread and those nuts, and that's how I'm holding it.
Right.
I'm holding it by the all thread and the nuts on each side, nuts and washer. That way, and you notice that I'm using a torch because I can isolate the heat onto each right where I want it, and I'm taking a ball peen and I'm just gently working it down. So I don't have to strike it too hard. It's not going to fall out of the vise.
Right.
So you see the washer and the nut on either side.
Yep.
And they are actually covering the holes where the all threads are. You can see one of them peeking out just a little bit. But they won't slip out. They won't vibrate out. They're not going to come out because you've got it. The washer covers those. So there's a little bit of design and engineering that goes into just setting this little piece up.
Right.
So Also, the depth down into the jaw of the vise is important because if you're sticking up way high, it's all accessible with a hammer. An air hammer blow will ding up your whole work. So you
Right.
keep it down in there as low as you can, and those jaws, top of those vise jaws,
Yeah,
will kind of protect your work a little bit.
I got you.
And you're just having to work down into that crevice. That's important.
I'm gonna
You'll
try,
find out if you'll find out if you don't.
and this is, we can pull in here, and you can see how those ended up cleaning up
That's right.
around that collar.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And they're just again going over with progressively finer either files or sandpaper and a Fordham tool, and then polished. I mean,
Right.
to the degree that you need it to be, whatever your intention is.
Yeah.
It's very versatile. And can you imagine? Can you imagine if you were a jeweler, you could set uh, stones in each of those little rosettes.
Right. So I'm just popping through these
Yeah,
the
go
emails
ahead.
again real quick just to make
You,
sure.
yeah, you
Um,
may see you may come to the image that you were looking for.
um, leaf integral guard. Oh, and this is the set we were just looking at.
Yeah,
Not that one. Not that spacer. It's not part of this. Nope, that's the sword. Like, I
I
had
sent
these
you
all
too much.
downloaded. The problem when I download them and add them to the streaming platform is it makes the images about a quarter of an inch by half or by about 3/8 of an inch, and so I actually struggle to see. Yeah, I'm not seeing unless it was sent in an earlier. No, I'm not seeing it, unfortunately. But I think the one that we did see with the that got squished down, the pins or the points squished down
Hmm.
the circles, that helps to illustrate essentially what's happening. And but instead of having those points, it's just a proud rim all the way around, and so you're upsetting it all the way around. um and are you starting at the edges when you upset, or you start in the middle when you start to drive that down, that center washer or that ring?
First off, I just get a section, just a little spot hot, and then start with my. I'm using a 16-ounce ball peen,
Okay.
and because if I use anything heavier, it's going to start moving it in the vise. It'll start shifting,
Yeah.
and it's too light, it won't work fast enough. So the
Mm,
appropriate size hammer is important. So I just start pecking on it and just seeing where I calibrate with my eye. I'm seeing every hammer blow, the
right.
light reflection. I've got a window. I'm keep kind of glancing over to where my work area is. It's just out of habit.
Yeah. Yep.
But I have to have a reflective light kind of off to the side or behind to see the hammer blows.
Oh,
Seeing the
interesting.
reflection right where my hammer just struck, I know where my muscle memory, so I can adjust based on that little sparkle of hammer where I see the hammer blow.
Right.
And actually, in any blacksmith shop, you're going to have an open light source. You should have. It shouldn't be bright. It should be dimly lit, but it should have
Yeah.
some way of having a reflective light source. You can see your hammer blows better. Well, anyway, I'm watching that, and so I adjust from there. And it's the 16-ounce hammer, the ball peen, the depth of it in the vice jaws. Uh, my response to what I'm seeing is where I just make tiny adjustments and I just work it a little bit at a time. And I don't go down, even on the wedding band where it's a solid ring,
Right.
I don't go down 100% right there and then just move over and do another one. No, I go around
Hmm.
it and get it started. And so that way, if I need to drift or adjust, I have time to make a
That's smart.
correction and I just keep rotating. So I have some tongs that are shaped kind of like this. So
Okay.
I can reach between the jaws, undo the vise, rotate
And
it
just
just a little
rotate.
bit, tighten
Yeah.
back down,
Yep.
and just progressively go around the oval of what is going to be the spacer.
Right.
and just work it down. And I just look at it closely and make sure that there's no gaps. That I've done a good job on it. And then I do a light heat just because this is a lot of times this is stainless steel. So
Oh wow.
I do it
Okay.
like a normalizing.
Sure.
And if it's anything I'm going to have to file or machine or anything like that, usually all that's done, and I'm just using files. If it's anything that I'm going to have to file or machine, then I go back to the oven and anneal it.
Oh, gotcha.
So it's quite a ordeal, a long process. So
It sounds like
me to
it.
try to tackle it, that's why it's intermediate
Right.
forging. So there may be heating, forging, and then some annealing, some filing. I may have to go back. Some of the things I
I see. So
back
it's
to,
kind of describing the back and forth. They're kind of hopping around through different
yeah,
working processes.
yeah,
It's not like you do all the forging all at once or all the machining all at once. You kind of hop back and forth between if you need as needed.
as needed.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, as needed. So, and also, I'm this is a stretch, but I'm hopping back and forth between historic times. Like I'm doing some things from the early days and some things totally
Right.
modern. Like
You're
using,
time traveling.
yeah, I'm using the oxyacetylene torch, and I'm mixing some of the techniques and thinking together on the same piece.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how you can do that if you have all those things available to you. You can mix and
Yeah.
match.
Well, and I think that's the more skills you can develop, the more tools you have in your tool bag, basically, that you can reach for and have that versatility, or be able to make kind of those stylistic choices. And the more limited you are on what you know and understand, the more restricted you're going to be in what you can actually make and do, right? And
Exactly right.
so while it's going to take time for anybody, it's going to take time for any of us to build up those skills and the knowledge of those different techniques. But with as many as you can accumulate over time, it's really gonna inform. And actually, I feel like that's really the thing. The more skills and techniques that you develop and learn, that is where you have more of an ability to step into your own style, because now, instead of being limited by what you don't know, you have this variety of knowledge and understanding and technique and skills that you can reach for and pick and choose and put together, and then you can kind of be a little bit more creative. And that's how people, I think, makers, especially of knives, are really getting their work to stand apart from other work, is that they have a wider variety of knowledge and skills that they can plug in here and there to make those various stylistic choices.
And it's very satisfying to me when I share some of these techniques. Some of my fellow bladesmiths will they'll say, "I want to try that," and they'll always ask me,
Yeah,
and I say, "Of course, man, do it, go for it."
I'm pretty sure I've done that too.
Yeah, well,
To you.
I want you to,
Yeah.
but some of the things that are coming to me is pretty amazing, and I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the feedback I get, and
Yeah.
I had an image. I don't know what I've done with it, but it was one that J.R. Cook, Master Bladesmith J.R. Cook,
Hmm.
he made a sword, and he used this technique on that sword,
Oh, nice.
and he engraved and inlaid some gold, and it was just an amazing piece when it was done. And let's see, yeah, that's it. I don't know if this will.
Go ahead.
I don't know what how to
You
show it. I
just
mean,
put it up to the camera of your tablet.
okay.
Well,
Well, let me let's see how this works. It, I've got some reflection, but is that
if you pivot it to your left, oh, there you go. Yep, you can see that engraving. moving in
That's,
there. Oh wow. Oh wow. And each one's a separate panel.
and with a different image.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I've never seen that. Yeah, that's impressive.
Well, it had never been done as far as I know. I mean, literally, some of this stuff is because you start this conversation,
Right.
you you see where it can go. The possibilities are
Absolutely.
absolutely endless.
Yeah.
So that's one of JR's creations. I'm just amazed by it. Just amazed. Um,
That is such a good use of that technique too.
yeah,
That is really impressive.
yeah, it's just beautiful. So I gotta give him credit for taking something I showed him
Yeah.
and just making it his own.
Right. I know we're starting to get into overtime just a little bit. And so one last thing I wanted to touch on. Oh, actually, just a really quick picture I wanted to share. I believe this came from another maker. Did he send this to you, right?
Yes, that was a gift from uh, the knife maker in South Africa.
James Cannon?
Yes, or
Yeah.
Conan.
Conan, sorry.
It's but Stuart uh, Smith, Stuart Anthony Smith. We see him a
Right.
lot on uh, Instagram and Facebook.
We
He
do.
came
Yeah.
over to this past summer and he brought that little knife with gift,
Oh wow.
and it was sent over from that maker, which I may have met when I was over there in 2018.
Oh, 2018. Oh, cool.
But I mean, it's just very gratifying to see the appreciation that some of these folks have for the whole idea, the concept of one piece knife.
Yeah. Well, and I think the benefit that isn't really talking about or isn't really touched on very often, but of sharing your different techniques and skill or and knowledge and stuff like that is the impact that it's having on people and their lives and their ability to stretch their creativity and to incorporate some of what you're sharing into their own styles and techniques and approaches to their knife making. And those impacts are really really powerful. I'm like I'm starting to get a little emotional for some reason, but I think it's something that I feel real deeply is that impact is really important, and I think it's important that we talk about it because that's really the value of the work that we're doing is that we're having an impact. We do it for ourselves kind of from a selfish place or a creative expression, but then
Yeah,
this work goes out into the world and that impacts that person in a way, especially when it comes to them actually using the thing or being able to tell their story and share that experience of owning that work with someone else, as well as the way that you're sharing your knowledge and understanding and the different techniques that you're developing and pioneering to create some of this stuff and how it's impacting other makers. And again, it comes back to sharing because there's a great big wide world out there available to us, and I think unfortunately there are some people who think a little too I don't know if it's old fashioned or closed minded, but it's just there's this fear, I guess, that they might be operating from, that if I share this then it's gonna take away from me, instead of that uh, s- uh, um, symbiotic relationship we were talking before. A lot of people are afraid of it being more of a parasitic relationship, but the symbiosis that can come from it and the appreciation and the impact that we can have on each other in our lives, and especially through the craft, it's part of our legacy that we leave behind, is the way that we impact the people around us.
I totally agree. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Um, this whole idea of making a one piece knife, all one piece. Um, there's a maker in Iran,
Mm.
the country of Iran, and I've never met him personally, but for the last 2.5 years, he and I have been regularly speaking with one another uh,
Hmm.
by social media or WhatsApp or
Sure.
one of the message boards. Uh, uh, this has really impacted his life. Uh, because I mean, when you're in a country that it's a lot of uncertainties,
Sure.
but he's a skillful smith, and he can create things out of steel and iron that's amazing. But
Mm,
this right here adds one more way of using a minimal amount of material, something he does have available. He may not have
right.
exotic woods or antler or this or that we have, we might take for granted. He may not have those things, but he's got plenty of steel.
Right.
And he can make this knife, and he's doing a good job. He's actually doing so good that, I mean, you can tell he made it, and I didn't. He's got just a little flair of his own
Oh, interesting.
taste, but uh, I'm really proud of him. And he on Instagram he goes by apparak.co. A
Apparat.
Apparak APURAK.co.
Okay.
Now,
I'll have to
and
pull
that
that up.
means in Arabic it means maker.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Apparak.
I like that.
It means maker. So yeah, please follow his work. Uh, if anybody's interested in buying one of his knives, please do. He and I have both been talking about means of shipping and ways of transporting, uh, his product out of the
Yeah.
country and vice versa if need be. Um, I mean, just to stay within the laws and the limitations. This is where um, something like the X-ray design can really shine, and that's
Right.
what I wanted to do. I wanted to help somebody, and it's helped him.
I just pulled up his page, and yeah, he's doing really clean. Very good work. That's so cool.
Yeah, and he's great with the videos.
Mm,
His uh, his control and composition, everything about the photography and the videos is wonderful. The music,
yeah.
everything. He does a wonderful job. He'd fit right in. He
Well,
actually
I'll
do
tell
better than me.
that's a great compliment coming from the creator of this style. I will say that you definitely have impacted my work when I was making a Tonto a few years back, and usually they have from the blade they have a little bit of a spacer, and then they have the suba, and then another spacer, and then the handle. And I kept looking at all these different um, examples, and I was trying to figure out how maybe I can kind of skip a step, basically, because I love fire etched Damascus. I was like, maybe I can forge this, and I kind of used that upset edge, that rim, um, that you're doing on your ring fit ups for your spacers materials. I kind of did that around the edge of the suba, but the way I forged the suba was again trying to figure out how to utilize the material in a meaningful way so that I have that spacer kind of built into the actual suba. But then when going through the forging process, it reveals that Damascus pattern and fire etches that Damascus pattern into it. And you actually jumped in at one point while I was doing it, and you paid me a very kind compliment of just using my anvil. I was like on the table of the anvil next to between the horn and the work face, and isolating kind of like the way I was hitting. And I was just I don't have a torch, like I said earlier, so I was just using the forge to heat material up and upset it, and it ended up working out great. I mean, I had to go through a couple different iterations to kind of figure out the right amount of material to leave as an excess around the edge, basically to be upset into that kind of um, raised edge kind of situation. But again, the compliment you paid me was very kind, and it really was encouraging, honestly, to get that kind of feedback from a maker like yourself, who is extremely talented, but somebody whose work that I look up to. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Um, the one last thing that we kind of wanted to talk about is the flower guard, I believe. Or sorry, I don't know. I feel like I keep calling it the wrong thing. Oh, that's not it.
Oh, you mean the dogwood?
This one. This,
Yeah, the integral leaf guard.
The integral leaf guard, which is another new technique that you've kind of pioneered. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what kind of what inspired you to go to create this guard like this?
Well, Joe Kiesler, his work inspired me, and
Okay.
while he usually does a single guard, I don't know that he's done a double guard.
Okay.
But what I have discovered working with different heats is, of course, the metal is going to act differently. So I figured a heat and a hammer and a technique and a way to hold it to get it to push out extremely and make a cornice, or it hangs out a lot more. It doesn't just roll up and ramp up. It actually has a definite corner to it underneath there.
Right.
Yes, I can repeat it, but describing it is very difficult. I use a cross peen hammer that has kind of a radius cross peen. Historically, a cross peen was kind of square. But I use a Hoffy style made by Tom Clark. I got a Tom Clark hammer, and I use it quite a bit for such applications.
Yeah.
But the way I hold it in the vise is different than, say, what you would think. I actually hold it edge to edge, and I drive that piece down onto the top of the vise jaw. So it gives it support. It gives it a place to stop.
Okay.
There's a couple of other things I do, but I mean, it's not a secret. It's just going to be too time consuming to try to verbally describe it. It's quicker to show. But when you the first thing I do, I start with a wider piece, like 2.5 inches bar.
Wider than what your finished blade is going to be.
Yeah, I want it to be a lot wider than the finished blade is what it's going to be. And then I narrow in front and behind the material. So where the tang is going to be, I will narrow that down, get it kind of out of my way, and I'll narrow down where the blade's going to be and get it out of my way. So that leaves 2 little bumps.
Yep.
Like that. And those bumps are what I hammer down this way, and then I spin it around on the vise jaws where I can access it and hammer that one down.
Oh,
and they
interesting.
start doing like this on top of the vise jaws. And eventually they get long enough and far enough. And then after cleanup, you have to allow some material to clean up underneath where those vise jaws are going to be bearing.
Yep.
Then you after you're happy with the way that's all shaping, then you go back and you forge your blade.
Gotcha.
And there's another piece. You see that piece that's behind that actually is hot fit into the back of those leaves. They actually bury themselves into the front of that piece.
Trying to think. I thought I pulled a picture.
Yeah, I've got some arrows pointing at the recess where they sunk into the face of it.
Yeah, let's see. It's this one. Right.
Yeah. Here. You can see it looks like an I-beam has been driven into the face of it.
Yeah.
And so
that's the front. That's those leaves, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can come back and flatten after all that forging. It could be misshapen just a little bit on the back because you're driving it on there, and you can come back and reflatten that back, and that your handle bears against that. And I always choose a handle material that will be appropriate. In other words, something that's strong and tough. And in other words, I wouldn't use something that I think might. Because see how big that tang is. I mean, you look at the hole in that. That's hot onto that. That's a heavy tang. It's probably 1/4 inch thick and 5/8 or 3/4 inch tall. let's just say it's 1/4 by 5/8. That's a lot of metal tying,
right?
And it's back into the handle more. So what I've done, the hand actually comes up onto that. So any chance of stress risers, normally the stress riser is right in front of the guard.
Sure.
Where the guard face and the back of the shoulders of the ricasso meet.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that I don't. I do stress relieve it by heating that area anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But when you hot fit another additional piece, that also stress relieves it, and it makes it a perfect fit. And in this case, it moves it back within the realm of your hand grip.
Yeah.
So it's not out front where there's more stress, as in a case of a striking blow. It's within your hand. So the stress is not going to be, it's dampened by your hand. It's not going to be as much stress. So I really believe this is about the strongest hidden tang construction that there ever could be. It's a perfect.
Well, and traditionally, a hot fitting like that is what they would do for swords. This is a different project, but you get a similar idea of how it's hot fit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right, Lin. I'm gonna let you off the hook, but we want to see you back here again another time for sure. You've been a really incredible inspiration, honestly, to me, but obviously people around the world, all the way to Iran and back. And we really appreciate everything you do and to exemplify what a mastersmith is in this craft, and for all the work that you do to help educate others, to kind of encourage them to push themselves, honestly, and what they can do. And so I thank you again for your time. I'm going to give one last shout out to the super sponsors. We have Michael Poor, again, you can find on Instagram at Red Dragon Forge. We have Russell Tinsley, who you can find on Instagram at Can't Make Knives, at Ouzelfinch Beers. And then we have Dan Hubbs at 66 Mountain Knives on Instagram and Facebook. Lawrence Lake at Maritime Knife Supply on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. You can also find them at maritimeknifesupply.com. We got Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Forge at Anchorage Brewing on Instagram, as well as Anchorage Forge. Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC. And then finally, we have Mr. Josh A. Weston of the Dragon Forge Experience on Instagram, Dragon Forge EXP at Dragon Forge EXP, as well as at Josh A. Weston on Instagram. Lin, you are a wealth of knowledge and talent and skill, and I hope someday to work with you, hopefully sooner than later, because I really love your work, and I think you're a great guy in general too, and I like working with people that I like. So I appreciate you again taking the time. It means a lot. And I'll let you get on with your day. I know you're a busy man, and so we're all very thankful and fortunate to have you to sit down and join us for a short conversation, but for a conversation around your work and your history and your background, and I can't wait to see what new things you come out with next. I'm sure you have a brain full, if not a journal full, of all kinds of different designs and ideas that you have yet to execute. And so I look forward to those as well.
Thank you, Mariko. I really appreciate it, and you're welcome here anytime.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Oh my God, I got ahead of myself. We did have one question. Part of the Patreon thing is that they get to be part of the conversation. And we have a question from Yerwin Nippenberg. He says, your intricate forging and brute to forge knives are incredible, Lin. What do you see as the future of this style of making? What do you want to achieve yourself in the future, or what do you see other makers working towards? So how do you see, obviously your work and style has already started to influence others. Where do you see, do you imagine seeing more people doing that work? And then where do you kind of see some of that going for yourself in the future?
Well, what I want to do, my main goal is by sharing some of these techniques and things I've discovered and developed.
Yeah.
I want to. I just want there to be impressed upon any new maker that it's within their grasp, it's within their abilities to do something that no one else is doing. So we start off imitating, right? That's what we have to do, paint by numbers, as it were.
Yep.
And we get good at that, but then we want to start working on creativity. So we take things we learned and mix and match some of those things, and we can be creative. So I want anyone out there that's watching or listening to don't underestimate your ability to be creative. So that's what we really want to encourage, creativity.
Absolutely.
We get to where we see we're in a rut. We might feel like we're in a kind of that rut. So that's a sign that we need to try something different, be more creative, take a class,
Sure.
study other people's works, other culture. Other culture is where you're going to start picking up things that has been done for decades or hundreds of years. There's lots of examples comes to mind. Jordan Lamoth is doing Kafgari and other techniques. It's just wonderful, and that's the kind of thing that I want to see, and that's what I'm hoping to encourage. I may not be able to do it myself. I may not be able to travel or go. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore, so. But I want to encourage those who are in that same circumstance as Jordan. Go for it and learn it, and get some of these other cultural techniques down, and it may, you never know where it's going to go for you.
Absolutely. That was a beautiful answer, and I think that's a great way to finish the podcast. Thank you so much. And again, thank you everybody, and we look forward to chatting you again next time. Bye.